All right. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here for this infrastructure workshop. This is the third workshop of today. We started with natural resources this morning and then had a conversation about transportation, and then now we're going to have a conversation about water. My name is John Romine. I'm part of the team at Collaboratory, but also part of the support team for the Recovery Task Force. I'm going to touch on that in a little bit. But before we get started, Alani. We'll do some quick welcomes and introductions. So I want to start at the far end of the panel. So we have a panel and then we have branch members, but I'm going to start at the far end. Just a quick housekeeping note. Before you speak, please push the button so your light turns green. Yep, you got it. And that'll be true for the branch members and the conversation back and forth. This is being streamed live and recorded, so we want to make sure everybody can hear what everybody has to say. So we'll start at that end and work our way this way.
Thank you. Paul Klingen, City Cape Coral, Director of Capital Improvements.
Jeff Pearson, Utilities Director for the City of Cape Coral.
Pam Keys, Lee County Utilities Director.
Dave Kistel, Vice President, Lee Health.
Richard Moulton, Utilities Director, City of Fort Myers.
Vitesmi Alkakis, General Manager, the Greater Pine Island Water Association.
David Willems, Public Works Director, Village of Estero.
Andy Keeble, Director of Operations for Bonita Springs Utilities.
Mike Sprayberry, I'm the Senior Advisor for Emergency Management for Haggerty Consulting.
Great, thank you. And so we have a huge panel for this one, and we only have 90 minutes together. So we will have to make sure we share airspace today. And so one of the things that I do ask of all of you is if somebody's already sort of addressed a question, we don't need to necessarily double down on it just so we can get through the conversation. So real quick, for those who aren't aware of what the Recovery Task Force is, so it's based on the FEMA framework. It happens after disasters hit a community. And so the Board of County Commissioners unanimously appointed Kevin Ruane as the chair. And then you can see the membership of the task force made up by the additional 12 folks. So there's 13 members that are part of the task force representing the elected bodies within Lee County. There are 8 branches that make up the Recovery Task Force. So you have the Planning and Capacity Branch, which is really looking at the highest level. They're focusing on sort of policy, high level policy for the entire county, economic recovery, education and workforce, health and social services, infrastructure, which is what we're here for today. And Ryan Carter is the branch lead for that branch, housing, natural resources, and cultural resources. So those are all of the branches that are tied together that ultimately lead to the resilience and recovery plan. This is our aggressive timeline that we've been on. So we started in late February, early March, driving towards a December 5th, 2023 Board of County Commissioner meeting where they will vote on the recovery and resilience plan. And so for the past month and a half, we've been really working on and focused on community engagement. And so we're going to touch a little bit on what that means. But gathering information, the branches identified some additional priority areas, the community in some cases confirmed them, and then in other cases added additional priorities for the branches to consider. And so now we're developing what those priorities will be for each of the branches in the plan. And then that'll drive us to another round of community engagement to see if the branches and the Recovery Task Force got it right. In order to finalize that plan for December. Just a snapshot of the community engagement. There were 15 in-person town halls throughout Lee County, 2 virtual, both the in-person and the virtual. There was Spanish options. Thank you. And then plenty of media coverage for them, and then over 1,000 participants in those town halls. And then we have a survey that is on the resiliently.com website. So if you haven't filled it out or haven't shared it with folks to fill out, that is still available for people to complete and share their priorities for themselves and their communities. So almost 5,000 people there. And then on March 30th, we had a region-wide event, which included the other 4 counties, but it was called On the Table, and that was really community conversations around things that folks are prioritizing in our community. And so there were 1,000 surveys completed there. So a robust community engagement effort, not perfect, but definitely got a lot of input and prioritization from the community. So this week is all about workshops. So the Recovery Task Force itself, so the 13 members, they meet on a monthly basis. They meet the last or the 4th Friday of every month. They meet the 4th Friday of every month right here at Collaboratory. And then in between those meetings, the branches meet, those 8 branches meet as well. This week is all focused on how we start to finalize or start to prioritize what the branches are going to develop for initiatives, which will be in the resiliency plan. There are 4 topic areas. So today is all about critical infrastructure. One note, power was supposed to be this afternoon. It has been rescheduled to June 21st. You all should have gotten that notification, but June 21st in the afternoon between 2 and 5, somewhere in that time frame. And it'll be held here as well. So that is the only one that is outside of this week currently. Wednesday is supporting business and workforce. Thursday is community resilience. And then Friday is all about housing. So in total, there's 15 total workshops that'll be had. I think that's the right math, with the majority of them except power being held this week. The idea is this is an opportunity. So a lot of the subject matter experts that are on the panel were recommended by the branch members across different branches. So this is a chance for, because everything is under the sunshine and publicly noticed, this is a chance for the branches to engage with subject matter experts to understand how to develop out the initiatives related to their branch priorities. And so for this conversation, then I'm going to turn it over to Mike to ask some questions. But this conversation is really all about the water infrastructure projects that will provide the greatest resilience value in defending key infrastructure assets. And what I want to say is we've already revisited the immediate aftermath of the storm. We need to be thinking long term. We need to be thinking big picture. We need to be thinking about, if resources were unlimited, what do we need to do to make our infrastructure, specifically our water infrastructure, more resilient? So think potable water and sanitary sewer systems. What do we need to do to make those pieces of our infrastructure more resilient, whether it's for another Hurricane Ian, something worse, whatever it could be, other disruptions that happen in our community? What would we need to do to make it more resilient? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
All right. Thanks, John. Again, Mike Sprayberry here, and I just want to thank our expert panelists for coming here today. To be clear, I'm not the expert on waterworks, and but I do know how important they are. I can tell you that as the emergency management director for the state of North Carolina, we always ensured that we had a seat for the American Water Works North Carolina section inside the state EOC, as well as the North Carolina Rural Water Association. So we know how important water is. When you don't have good water or good wastewater operations, you're having a bad day, right? So you can see the key questions up there. Key upgrades provide the most disaster resilience for water infrastructure. What type of coordination or support is needed in order to increase resiliency across the board for Lee County water infrastructure, regardless who owns it? So I'm going to start off with a few questions and we'll just go down the line. I'm a little bit of a disadvantage. I don't know everybody's name, so I'll just point to you and hopefully you'll help me out here. All right. So the first question, and for me, I would say that it's really important to be thinking about maybe your top 5 priority water projects for, the county munis around here, and how you can compress the timeline to get those projects completed. What might those be? How can you get those accelerated? So kind of be thinking along those lines, because as you know, there's a lot of money, a lot of revenue that are revenue streams coming from different grant sources coming in here. And we want to make sure that we are choosing the right projects to address and mitigate some of the hazards that you're facing. So the first question is, what are the key water projects needed to ensure the area's resilience to a hurricane with even more intense impacts than Hurricane Ian? I know you don't want to imagine that, even more intense, but and I know you're thinking you're going to be first, so I'll move to somebody else. How about you, sir? The Greater Pine Island Water Association.
Thank you, Mike. So what I would say generally is more redundancy. So the storm does impact on a regional, in a regional area, but all of our different infrastructure is located throughout that area. So for example, let's say Sanibel could get hit really hard, but we have an interconnect with Sanibel. So through these interconnects, the redundancy and water sources, you know, we could provide water to the island. We have an interconnect with City of Cape Coral. If we were hit hard and we were in this storm, the city provided us water for our interconnect. So just having redundancy. So interconnects between utilities and then redundancy within those utilities, and those interconnects serve as another layer of redundancy.
So are there any physical projects that you can associate with those redundancy interconnects?
Sure. For example, you know, for our utility, we have a pre-existing 10-inch water main interconnect with Sanibel, but it's leaky. So we need to fix it. One way of doing that in a compressed time frame would be to advertise a design build project. So instead of doing a traditional design bid build, you could compress that into a design build. But that would be an example.
Okay, thanks. How about you, sir, from the city of Fort Myers Public Works? Richard?
One of the areas that I think we can improve is methodologies that would allow interconnects that have different chlorination methodologies to be able to move water across the divide. The city has an interconnect with the county, very robust, but because of the difference in chlorination methodology, there had to be further steps made in order to do the connection and do it safely for citizens. So we had to incorporate that logistic into making that decision. And we would have to make adjustments in order to make that transfer of water happen. So there are methodologies to do that. We have to invest in those methodologies so this could be seamless in a time of true need.
How did your water system hold up during Ian? Was it pretty resilient?
No, for the first time, we had to discontinue service to some of our citizens, some of the hardest hit areas, the downtown area, and a couple of larger lines that we found water breaks that were impacted. So that's the first time we've ever had to do that. But we had for a short period of time, and before we got our storage up and we got the breaks fixed. So that was an inconvenience to our citizens that we dearly not like to have happen.
Thank you, sir. You, sir?
So the Village of Estero is a little bit different in that we don't actually own our utility. So we're provided utilities from Bonita Springs Utilities and Lee County Utilities. But one of the most impacted areas we had is on well and septic. And those residents, some of them were without power for several weeks. So they ended up not having any water at all. Those are the areas off of Broadway. And then we had some other areas that were further upstream that actually had almost no impact from the hurricane, but still ended up going 3 to 4 weeks without water because they didn't have power. So one thing that the village would like to see is getting those residents off of well and septic and onto central water and sewer so that they can at least have that service shortly after the storms.
So that's kind of what's happening where I'm from, Oak Island, North Carolina, Barrier Island, and we're moving off, well, and we have moved off well and septic at a pretty substantive cost, I might add, and we're still paying for it. And so any plans for y'all to do that in the future?
Yeah, we're working on it already. We were actually working on it before the hurricane hit. And then the impacts from the hurricane made it obvious that it was actually even more important than what we had originally. Originally it was more of an environmental issue, but now it's a public safety issue as well. There's also a couple of packaged wastewater treatment plants. We have 3 of them within the village, and 2 of them were flooded by the hurricane.
Okay, thank you, sir. Bonita Springs?
Sure, I would just add, in addition to some of the other items mentioned so far, source water and wells that supply the production of the treatment facilities, some of those wells and facilities that were constructed 30 and 40 years ago might not have the elevation they need, to remain in operation after just some of the flooding that we saw. So, making sure that the source water is resilient, any improvements made to keep those from flooding in the future.
Okay, thanks. Lee Memorial Health System.
Thank you. So we represent a little bit different from what you've heard from the other folks. We are the receivers of the services, both water and sewer. And obviously, if we don't have those two services available to us, we cannot run a hospital. And we actually have to begin evacuating the hospital, which we had to begin evacuation of 2 of our hospitals. So water and sewer systems are critical for the operations of the hospital. Water's required for our HVAC systems, for our cooling systems, for steam, for humidification,
Right.
for sterilization and fire protection. And without water, we cannot run a hospital, and without water, we can't take care of the citizens' needs right after the hurricane. So what I want to talk about is a couple of things, and I think it was just brought up by my colleague. Number one is that you have to protect the source. So I think we need to look at all of the source points and make sure that the structures, the systems, utilities, the generation will be in place to ensure that that source will not go down. It is capable of standing and supporting water, number one. Number two, you heard talk about how to share systems, interconnect. I think that's important, but I would say distribution. I think we need to have a distribution system that looks at what are the essential facilities of the community. We need to make sure that we have a means and a way to get water to those systems and not be interconnected with a multitude of other businesses and residential. What we found is that the source water for us was also interconnected with tons of businesses and homes, and there were breaches and leaks all over. Thereby, no water pressure because we had leaks. So we need to think about the distribution system and how that's being done today. And we need to think about how we can better improve that for critical services. The other thing is opportunity to know in real time, where are the leaks and breaches, and do we have valves and systems? Can we control those differently than how we're controlling them now? But I think there are some opportunities to harden those systems. Going back to sanitary sewer systems, again, it's essential. We did not have failure of sanitary sewer systems, but we did have some failures of generators at lift stations. And if those lift stations go down in their close proximity to a central facility, i.e. a hospital, it puts your hospital in emergency jeopardy. And once you have that backup coming into your hospital, you're closing your hospital down. So these are really, really critical, life important functions. So one of the things I would propose is that what can we do right now? We need to be thinking about essential facilities and putting in wells at those campuses to at least provide some type of secondary support water for fire protection, sanitary, and humidification. And those are things I think can be done fairly quickly compared to maybe some of these other projects that I think need to be done, but may take more than a year to do.
So do y'all have a prioritization list for critical infrastructure for power, water, stuff like that?
We do.
Okay,
And right now it's, power has not been an issue because we have the generator capacity and backup at our hospitals to meet or exceed the code. So as long as we can get fuel, and we've basically gone to dual fuel in most of our campuses, so I can run the entire hospital as long as I can get diesel fuel or natural gas. Water and sanitary sewers are different. I don't have backup resources for that. That's why it becomes really important to look to our colleagues here around the table And I've worked with all these folks during the storm. I would like to thank them for their response and what they did. But I think we can do better. And I think we can use some of this allocation to make sure that we preserve our water services and sanitary sewer systems.
Right, and thank you for those, dealt with the same thing in North Carolina after several hurricanes, where we had to make sure that we had emergency generation to keep water and sewer going, and it got pretty dicey there for a little bit, but we managed to do it. How did you, so you evacuated people out of the hospital?
We had all 4 hospitals, we had no water.
Okay,
City of Fort Myers, they were able to bring some water back online. City of Cape Coral, working with them, they put all of their resources in trying to get a line back to the hospital. We were 10 minutes away from getting an evacuation notice from the state of Florida, ACA. So we thank these folks. The Lee County Utilities Department, they had major breaches. We were in contact. They were doing everything that they could do. Unfortunately, because we lost all of the critical water and the services that function, we were asked to begin evacuation by the state of Florida. So the Children's Hospital, Health Park Medical Center, and Gulf Coast Medical Center began evacuation. We never shut our emergency rooms down, and we were treating patients after the storm. Again, prioritization by Lee County Utilities. They were able to stabilize the breaches, and they were able to bring water back onto us. Again, we were able to stop evacuation, stabilize, and start taking patients in.
thanks. That's a good story. Lee County?
Well, a lot has been said from my colleagues. I think like every event, you have lessons learned, and we had a little bit of a head start here in Florida. We spend a lot of time talking about climate change and resiliency, redundancy, and being ready for emergencies. After Irma, it was a lot about power loss, and it was more about wastewater because of power loss and lift stations. This really is the first time where our utilities were impacted by water, and a lot of it is just trying to get those redundancies in place, but also developing those relationships amongst ourselves and amongst our partners so that we're responding and helping each other. The utilities act as independent business units. However, we are very close with each other in cooperation and communication. So I think the type of projects that you'll see in the future really are dealing with trying to raise electrical systems and control systems so they're not impacted by flooding or surge, trying to get those redundancies, trying to get more interconnects, just more of those lessons learned from this event, just like past events.
Right, an excellent time to develop those public-private partnerships and get everybody on the same sheet of music. Cape Coral?
Hi, Jeff Pearson, City of Cape Coral Utilities Director. As my colleague stated, they actually touched on a lot of things that I have on my list here. But some of the things I think we also should think about based on the question that would provide for the whole area would be, and these are just ideas or suggestions, requiring undergrounding of utility power, especially to critical facilities such as the hospital, lift stations, water treatment plants, police, city, fire, all of that critical need infrastructure. Also, facility hardening projects for water treatment plants. One of our south plant got hit pretty hard, but we were able to get it back up online. Part of the plan is a metal structure. We call it Plant 2, and we had a roll-up door that was facing the south, and it blew in and then took some of the roof off. It's an older facility. It was built in the late 70s. Also, potentially requiring residential and commercial to not plant trees with large root systems within, X number of feet to be determined from lateral lines, because that was what caused a lot of the breaks that caused a lot of utilities having to shut the water system down because we couldn't keep up pressure. There were so many breaks, kind of like a death from 1,000 cuts is what we were dealing with. Also developing maps for each utility. We've done this because we actually had to do it with the hospital. We had to we isolated 2 larger diameter mains from both our RO plants to a place in the center of the city around Santa Barbara and Nicholas. And we kept going, and we went by police station, city hall, EOC, and on to the hospital, shutting down. And now we know which valves we need to shut down because the system is looped, but it's still possible. It took us about 36 hours or more straight out in the field, turning valves and flowing hydrants, trying to figure out if we had everything shut down and isolated. So having that map, I wish we'd have had it before the storm, but like Pam said, it's never happened before. But now we know it can happen because of, a lot of the landscaping caused a lot of those breaks. When the trees fell over, the roots pulled out the lines, the lateral lines. Also, I agree with Dave. I think it's a really good idea to have maybe a well system with a small treatment facility that could be turned on in this event, because to me, it just doesn't seem possible because some of the facilities are so far away from the plant to have a dedicated line. It would be extremely expensive and to do that for something that may or may never happen. So I think, having a small well and treatment plant with backup generator would be very helpful. And also possibly a sewer septic tank or something that you could divert it to that tank that could be pumped out by a vac truck or a tanker truck. And also maybe even, and I suggested this during Irma, after Irma, maybe the state or the county have a repository of standby generators and pumps that if we, one area needed it more, we would have them there already. Because one of the things we ran into was getting those generators here. Then another issue was they didn't always send us the wires to hook them up. So you had to have people to kind of hot wire them into the control panels for the lift station. So that was an issue. And if we had, either all of us have a generator or bypass pump for every lift station and well, or we have a repository where maybe we all contribute a certain amount to keep them maintained. And then if we needed them, we could pull them out and we'd have them here in the county.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's different ways to do that. And, first you got to make sure you have to have your quick connect established in there. And then where are you going to source your generators? Well, I was advised when I first became the director that you could count on the Army Corps of Engineers. And I got to say, well-intentioned, but pretty slow. And so, because they have to send out a team to look at everything, and I understand that, I get it. And so for us, the best was a hybrid of having our own generators that we maintain in our warehouses, and then having pre-positioned contracts And I'm gonna tell you, those contracts worked a charm, and they were procured according to FEMA, CFR regulations, so that everything that we did with those generators, once we got them via contract, was reimbursable. And so just a thought. So great point, sir.
All right, to expand on what everyone was saying is, Cape Coral, half the city has existing water, sewer and irrigation. So we have an extensive utilities extension program. So right now we have over 300 wastewater lift stations. Our master pump stations have permanent generators, but the lift stations don't. So as we extend into the north part of the Cape, we have a ratio typically on the lift stations that for every 3 to 4 lift stations, we would buy a portable generator. So now we're reevaluating that to actually put permanent generators as we extend the utilities. And that goes to everything that's been said here. And again, that's over the next 20-25 years.
What size of generators are you talking about for a typical lift station?
About 100 kW.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay. So, I mean, this is good for the group too to hear. I get, so y'all have got a lot of good information out here. Just to let the audience know, is incredibly a lot of good information. And so like I told you before, when you're having water and wastewater problems, you're having a bad day. You don't want to ever have your hospitals having to evacuate ever. And so good luck with that. That was good business. And so heard a lot of good things here. Like what you said about map of the lines, and we learned about that during our drought in 2007. And I also learned how fragile our water infrastructure is in some parts of our state. I mean, some of it's super old. And so not necessarily here, I'm just saying in North Carolina. All right, thank you for that. And I like what you said also about, going straight from bid to project and skipping a step. I mean, you got to sort of think outside the lines sometimes to get what you want, get it going pretty quick. So are there innovative solutions to living with water or designing new infrastructure that can tolerate water intrusion? I know in places like Boston, they've built infrastructure to where when they know they're going to be flooded, so they build infrastructure that it can accept the water and it doesn't damage it. And so it's a project that they have. It's pretty innovative. And so, do you have any thoughts about living with water, designing new infrastructure that can tolerate water intrusion? Last meeting was on transportation, and we had Rob talking about signal boxes that got water intrusion. Salt water doesn't do well inside those boxes. But anyway, sir.
Yeah, I guess for that note, there are some things we've looked at, whether you could raise these control panels, raise them up, have them telescoping per se, or if there's even some people looking into waterproof panels, having them being able to be completely submerged and remain waterproof.
So, how do the generators tolerate all this stuff? I mean, is it a pretty massive cleanup after you got to tear them down and build them back, or what?
Yes, or replace them. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So they get ruined. All right. I'm going to try the Estero. Okay.
Well, I think the key really, I think what was just mentioned is the power, keeping power, especially to the wastewater facilities. And it's difficult when you're getting 10 feet of storm surge that you're probably not going to have that high enough. So it's more the areas that either didn't flood or only flooded a little bit, raise the panels, and you'd be able to still function.
All right. Thanks. Greater Pine Island.
Thank you, Mike. I think the main problem is electricity, and you can't really get around electricity being submerged underwater and there being a problem. So let's just talk about buildings. We just need to have higher design standards for buildings. So right now, buildings are being built to withstand maximum sustained winds of something like 150, 170. We could go for critical infrastructure up to 210 miles per hour. We haven't seen any hurricanes yet that have had sustained winds that high. Sometimes, very infrequently, they can gust up to that high, but not sustained. So I think that's the key, is like build the buildings better to house the electrical components. So this would be like a wastewater treatment plant, a water treatment plant, not necessarily the lift stations. I think the key of the lift stations is making them higher so that they're out of the surge plane, though they can be waterproof to some degree.
So y'all can elevate lift stations too, huh?
Well, the control panels. they can be
Right,
Elevated. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right, Richard.
Yeah, so some of the successes we had is that we have a list number of stations along the river. Those that were built more recently with the higher elevations, 200-year flood elevation, survived very well. The older ones that were at the seawall edge obviously sustained a lot of damage, whether it be from the wet well to the panel. So rethinking how we redesign those and bring those back is part of our deliberation. The other thing we found was, where do we stage our generators? So we had a lot of generators right by our lift stations. We had to rethink that when we couldn't find some, and we found some with a high water mark way above. Found a couple still running, and that's a good thing, but that was a nuanced exposure that we had. We had a combination of pumper trucks, bypass pumps, and generators, and that trio of applications seemed to have worked well for us. We were able to recover those stations that had no power by a combination of all of those. So I think we had good success using that trio of application, depending on which station, its size. And we do have our master stations with permanent generators, but those were susceptible to a storm surge at the river's edge.
So, I'm pretty sure that everybody knows how many lift stations you have, right? And knowing that, which ones that are in pretty good shape that you've done some hardening on, Richard, and I'm sure everybody else has done some hardening on some of theirs, but probably not all. And so I'm wondering, I'm just throwing it out there, is that to harden as many lift stations as you can? Is that a pretty good project with incoming revenue, or would you choose to spend your money in other ways? Just a thought. You don't have, it's a rhetorical question, if you will, but or something to think about, because what I'd like to do at the end is, say, okay, we've got some money. What do you want to spend it on? Right now, to make yourself more resilient, to build yourself a more hardened infrastructure, critical infrastructure, water infrastructure. So thanks for that. So to the hospitals.
So we are, we're a special entity within the Florida Building Code, and elevations of our hospitals is considered a critical infrastructure. So there is a minimum requirement that our finished floor has to be elevated to. And of course, after Hurricane Andrew, we've seen the increase of that elevation to the point where at Health Park, the original facility was built at 10 foot above sea level. The new children's hospital had to be elevated to 18 foot 3 inches. So we have some critical points that we have to meet, and we did not have a water intrusion problem at our hospitals, but it was close at Health Park. We lost all the cars in the parking lot, and we were within inches to having it in the hospital. So, but I think going back to the topic of water and utilities, I think we all want to make sure that the hospitals are operational, because what we saw after the hurricane in our community was there was a huge need for our service to take care of. And all my colleagues here knew that, and they worked tirelessly to get us water, and we appreciate that. But again, talking about water projects and what Jeff said, is to put a facility in place adjacent to the hospital that we can turn it on and we don't have to worry about that issue. The utility folks can work on other issues. The critical infrastructure in the community, the healthcare, the hospitals will be in place. The other component too that becomes very important is secondary. We have walk-in centers that those become critical post-storm because if those are not operational, if your dialysis centers are not operational, then everyone converges on the hospital. So there is a secondary need in the community as well. Take care of those non-urgent care areas that we can support a lot of the treatment episodes after.
Hey, I totally agree with that. We use telehealth in our shelters in North Carolina with a nurse and an iPad and going back to the hospital. And so non-urgent care cases got handled right there at the shelter. Pam?
I think that what we've said is pretty comprehensive, where you're basically trying to get your electrical and instrumentation above floodwaters. What I do want to confirm is that finding the funding for redundancy and resiliency is very challenging. Traditionally, utilities have not received a lot of grant funding, and we basically are self-sustaining, which means we don't get general fund. There's not a taxing unit for us. It's really the users of the utility that's paying for the operation of that utility. With what's happening in our community now, I think there's a lot of great opportunities to look at the utilities as a team to say, if we can get these resources from federal and state sources, we can make a lot of improvements. But as been mentioned, a lot of these improvements are very costly. Without that type of financial support, you're basically making improvements as you build. It's not necessarily a focused, we want to improve the entire system. So I think that we're in a good spot after going through such an emergency. We're in a good spot to really concentrate on supporting one another and using our resources to get that state and federal funding that we're going to need to really make improvement.
Right. And I think you make a great point. I mean, usually the utilities don't get those federal grants. I think it's important though that we identify, what the gaps are and what your priorities are. So the team here, the Recovery Task Force, can work on identifying the funding that can buy down some of that risk and help you get to where we need to be. Maybe not all at one time, but pieces of it. And so because that's what we all do, we try to work as hard as we can to find some kind of funding to keep building more capacity and a hardened capacity. But I appreciate what you just said.
Can I interrupt with a couple of questions to
Sure.
follow up with that? We needed you guys to help us understand what you guys do, right? So you referenced interconnects. Do all of you have all interconnects with both water and sewer, or is it just water, or is it? So that's my question one.
So question number one, typically an interconnect will be water, not wastewater. Wastewater systems are much more area, like you have a service area. For the county, our water is interconnected between our different service areas as well as connected with adjacent utilities.
So that leads to the second one. So it sounds like sewer needs to be more geographic centric, less ability to share services. But we've got water issues, it seems like, throughout the county as well. Is there efficiencies on any level of these infrastructure items where you can build one $200 million water treatment facility in Lehigh because it's the highest elevation in the market and it can pump out everywhere? Just questions around synergies, I guess, is my big question to what can you guys do to make it more effective to use commission money or state money and work together so that it can be more effective?
So for Lee County, we do have partnerships. For example, in North Fort Myers, we have a water service area where the county provides the water, and then we work in partnership with FGUA, who does wastewater. So we are looking for those partnerships with FGUA to try to find efficiencies. When it comes to adjacent, we have partnerships with the city of Fort Myers where our service areas are adjacent to each other. Same idea. A lot of times you're trying to do projects that will benefit customers, both customers. So it comes down to kind of what makes sense for an area. And for us, one of the good things is our water system is interconnected. But then after the hurricane, we really had to clear the entire system before we were allowed to lift our precautionary boil water notice. So the benefit was we're interconnected and we can move water where we need to get it. The risk was that we had to clear the entire system before we could start doing that. So it's just a balance.
And that's pretty common in all the states, you know, with the interconnects on the water system. I mean, during the drought, it all revealed itself to me, and I was not aware of it, but really you guys work together. I mean, it's a team effort, and it's really extraordinary. I mean, it's another discipline that sort of unheralded guys and gals like these, I mean, that are doing the solid work that keeps us in good drinking water and wastewater facilities.
If I can,
Sure.
maybe. Good afternoon, Maya Roberts, City of Cape Coral Environmental Resources. To tag along on that and the interconnect, as we think about resilience and long range planning in the 25, 50 years from now, are you guys, if you collaborate now, are you guys collaborating on water supply from aquifer and things like that, with the economic growth that we're seeing, with development that we're anticipating? What are the projections? Is that going to put even more pressure? Are you going to get into collaborative agreements to share the water for some areas that will maybe see some saltwater intrusion and will have less access to drinking water, to aquifers? Do you have plans for that?
I think that, well, first of all, the water, groundwater is managed under the district. So they are the permitters of water use. For us, I think that we do want to understand what is happening countywide with source water. We want to be able to support one another if we're having those type of pressures, as we build our capacity and make sure that there's enough water for everyone. So I think that we're looking out for each other, but at the same time, we're not the regulator. So again, that's why we need to have these type of partnerships, is that if one utility starts having stress, then the adjacent utility can try to help, even if it's for a short-term period, while they get their capacity in place.
And that's something we've brought up in the previous panels, is that we're missing stakeholders here, which are state and federal partners, regulators that will impact, regulation that we can pass and things like that. Thank you.
Right. So any other questions from the branch? So next question. Are there policy changes that could speed the improvement of water infrastructure across the region? Are there barriers that should be addressed? Y'all feel like you
Yeah.
feel like you work pretty well together?
Well, I think we work well together. I think that, I do think that we're public agencies. We have to follow certain procurement processes. I completely understand that we're always looking for alternative means of getting our projects done faster and with more competitive means. we do try to have a strong working relationship with the regulators because, again, that's very important.
It is.
I think the biggest challenge is just, we know that we're a growing county. We've always been a county that's growing, and it's that constant trying to understand how quickly growth is coming and how quickly demand is coming. And that's where, when we're working together and seeing that growth, it helps all of us try to plan ahead. There are groundwater issues in Lehigh Acres. Lehigh is only served by utilities, maybe a third of the area served by utilities. So there's a lot of septic systems and individual wells. That's an area that we're really going to have to look at as a whole if you want to make long-term changes. But that is managed by a different utility. So I think sometimes the barriers are just trying to understand how quickly we're going to need infrastructure to be able to serve the public.
Right, and somebody said the day earlier, I think by 2045, there'll be 1.2 million people in the county. It's a lot of people.
So I'd
So,
like to add something to
Sure.
that. And I think, again, this brought us all very close together. I'm not sure the utilities truly understood the importance of water to our operations, to the point where our air conditioning systems were tied into water. So everybody understands that now, and they understand the critical nature water plays in the hospitals. And what I've found is that everyone on this panel is trying to figure out, how do we not make that an issue in the future? And how can we help so that this critical infrastructure we don't go through this again? And I think that becomes really, really important for, as we think just about water, the elderly population. So water, sanitary, and power, without those, a large component of our population is extremely at risk. And so it becomes really, really important that we have that infrastructure. And again, this team really understands the need of water. And some of these folks I've talked offline on, and we're looking at what are options, wells, putting those services in. So there are projects that we could advance, I believe, very quickly to start dealing with these critical infrastructure issues relative to water.
so are there any policies that are keeping y'all from doing that? Or are there any things that you want to change? How would you solve that?
I think the only policy will be working with the regulators to get our water permits specifically for this function. That's all.
Mike, I'd like to address that.
Sure.
And Director Key said it earlier, it's not a policy and there aren't artificial barriers. It's money. We're businesses, we don't get tax money, we have to create our own revenue. And so that revenue is limited and we have to run our businesses efficiently. So there's not a lot of extra money out there to do special projects. Now, I think all of us at the table have a time horizon, and this is to Maya's earlier point. So what's our time horizon? We typically have a 10-year CIP, most of us. So we're thinking 10 years out, but it's money. So if we could get more money, we could do more projects. I mean, I think everyone at the table has identified a laundry list of CIP projects they'd like to do. It's just, we can't fund them.
So money is the solver of the problems.
Mike, question. Community development districts get funded all day, every day, all over the state of Florida. Is there no mechanism for you to create similar structures to get the capital that you need in order to expand on the services? You certainly have a guaranteed revenue source that's better than a neighborhood is. Why can't you use other functions to get the capital needed?
Often the grants that are written, there aren't so many grants written for water, wastewater. There are mechanisms, there are like low interest state revolving fund loans, but there's not a lot of, I think it's because we're a business, there's not a lot of grant money out there for us.
Yeah, I'm referencing financing. So there is financing available.
I think so. I mean, we use financing all the time to try for these long-term, large capital projects. A lot of it is rate containment. you know, like any business, we're very aware of the cost of our business to our customers. So yeah, we do have plans for long-term debt, which our rates cover. But again, we have our basic level of service. What we're talking about today is trying to go better, bigger, beyond just the regular service. So trying to get funding available for that is a little bit more difficult when you're already trying to get funding just for basic services and contain your rates.
I guess you guys do what you do incredibly well. My curiosity is around if funding and low cost funding is available, working with a group that understands the capital matrix to get you guys the funding seems like a good approach to say, hey, you all are in massively growing areas. And if we don't get our infrastructure up to speed, way ahead of the need, you're going to be out of a hospital and we're not going to build any more homes and it's not going to work anyhow. So by nature, you are conservative entities. And what does it take to find the right balance of pursuit and approach to make sure that you have sufficient funds, especially when debt's cheap for you guys?
Sure. And I think that it is a balance. I mean, you have to look at the entirety of your needs. And then also it comes to rate containment. So now more than ever, we have opportunities for grants, which is a first for us. We're aggressively going for those grants. But our debt capacity many times is just to build existing level of service and capacity, not including these special projects, not including redundancies or a special treatment center for a hospital. That's even above trying to keep your utility running. So it's a balance. We do need the funding and the support, and hopefully that's coming from our state and our federal with their realization that we need that type of funding.
There might be some opportunities in IIJA. I guess y'all have looked at that, and maybe see some opportunities there.
We've spent a lot of time with our hazardous mitigation with FEMA. We've been working with emergency management. We now in the county have a new department to work on getting grants for the community. We're involved with those communications. So it is really trying to get involved in any area possible for utility improvements.
So you know what you want, just figuring out how to pay.
Yeah.
All right, how can we accelerate the key improvements in water infrastructure in a manner that also supports the county area residential development and growth trends? How can we accelerate key improvements in water infrastructure in a manner that also supports the county area residential development and growth trends? I know y'all are rolling like super fast, right? And so, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as extending utilities in Cape Coral, we use it's called the assessment. And so that goes towards where the individual homeowners have to pay over 20 years to extend those utilities.
So that allows you to install the infrastructure that they need for their developments.
Correct.
Add that.
Well, it's definitely a challenge for us to keep up with explosive growth that we're seeing right now. I think number one is you need to have a plan. You need to have a master plan. You need to start saying, okay, we're going to do this area, this geographic area, if it's not a planned development, because one of the challenges we have here in Lee County is we're pre-platted. And so you have all these quarter acre, half acre lots that are privately owned. Not where in other areas of the country where a developer comes in and it's somebody's farm and he plats it and extends utilities. So it is a very big challenge for us. So like Paul was saying, what we've been able to do, adapt to, is do special assessments for a particular area. And we've developed a master plan where with dates of when we're going to pull the trigger on the special assessments. Paul's group's going to, hire the engineering firms to do the design and permitting. And on the other side, I have to make sure my plants have enough capacity. What is the timing of those plant expansions? And so that's what we're doing right now. We're already doing that and or have done some of that and continue to do that. And so I think, the big takeaway really is having a plan, how you're going to get those utilities out to the customers and then executing it.
Right, and I guess you're upgrading your plant along the way in order to support the additional infrastructure. All right, Pam?
Right now, Lee County, we're doing several expansion programs at once. As Micah mentioned, you've really got to have a 30-year, 20-year, 5-year plan. And then every year you're trying to look at true flows to see if you're going to be on time. But for us, doing capacity projects at our plants and in the system is ongoing. When we work with developers, they are to follow our standards, and they do developer contributed assets where if they need services, then they build them and they turn them over to the utility for ongoing maintenance. So it is a partnership with developers to really understand the needs that they're going to have and when, because again, a lot of it is timing, where you're trying to get that capacity and those infrastructures in place in time. And yeah, we get surprises all the time, but it's a constant review of the systems.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And at the hospitals, you were talking about earlier, wanting, like a well and a septic system. But does the hospital, are they on the hook for that? Are they looking for grants for that, to expand their water infrastructure?
Yeah, so we have a basic requirement when it comes to infrastructure services. And obviously power has always been the one that is dictated by code bodies, right? You got to have the capacity to run your services. Water and sewer is really a place that, do you have that service available at the site? Yes or no? And that's where we look to our partners that we have it. And so what we have found though is with these disruptions of storms, as it disrupts our partners, it disrupts us. And so that's what has really led to these discussions. And also I think the water management is keen on not allowing everybody to go and get well permits. I think that's something that they are looking to reduce, not increase. So working with our partners, how can we ensure that we get uninterrupted power and sanitary services for the benefit of the public at our facilities? We're not in the business. We're not a water treatment center, and we're certainly not a sanitary sewer system. So that's why it's important to come together with our partners to figure out how do we resolve that issue, because with disruption of those two services, there goes your elimination of healthcare in the area. So that's why we started talking about the ability to put wells in and have a secondary source on the campus, or let our utilities do it for us. But think about things differently. Like I said, sanitary sewer systems, it wasn't a hardening issue. It was a generator issue. And but we also found is that without those lift stations in operation, it becomes a major issue for your facility. So working together as a partnership, helping these folks understand what's extremely critical and important to us, we're starting to have some pretty good dialogue and input. Nobody wants their hospital to be down. So what is the most efficient and effective way to ensure these services are not down?
Right. Richard?
Yeah, so with regards to, as an older city, we have to both maintain what we have, rejuvenate what we have that's older and build for the future. So cost containment on the rate side has to accommodate for all of those three moving parts at the same time. So there's pressure there to maintain good rates as well as do all three. So that is something that funding will help us to do, to echo what Pam and the team has said. Better delivery methods, faster methods of project delivery will help us. Coming up with design, build, that sort of application of faster delivery methods. The other thing is the master planning and looking for 20, 40 years into the future, we have an opportunity to adjust that and apply new technologies that can use reduced water qualities, but still be productive and cost effective. Applying strategies like that as part of our master planning, look into the future could be areas that we can help sustain the growth and be viable for the long term.
Are we close to having those new technologies for water quality?
Well, you can use, what we're trying to apply is technologies that can use waters of higher salinity as part of our strategy for long-term viability, because we know what the aquifer is doing and we're still getting permits from our district to use that aquifer. So as that changes in salinity, we have to come up with adjustments in the technology to be able to be productive at the same time. Other modalities, other aquifers, other methods of getting water to the plant and to the public also being evaluated.
That's pretty challenging, it sounds to me.
It is.
Thank you for that.
Not to sound redundant, but again, I think the question was, how do you accelerate key improvements to support residential growth? So that is where you take on long-term debt, because your customer base is growing and you can pay that debt back. Now for sort of hardening and redundancy projects, we would like to go towards grant funding first, because there's not a base there to get the money back. So if we can access the free money, that really helps in the hardening and redundancy and, mitigating storms that happen, Category 5 storms that happen once every 5 years. But like I said before, it's money. That's how you accelerate it.
Right. Mr. Rowe.
For the village of Estero, since we don't provide the actual utilities, we're in the working on planning to extend the utilities to the areas that don't currently have it. And then the county utilities and Bonita Springs utilities will provide those services.
Thanks. Bonita Springs.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, all these are good ways to accelerate it that you've heard before, different procurement methods and assessment or taking on debt, but I'm just gonna echo what the rest have said, that while you're taking on this debt and doing these other things, you do have to focus on keeping rates affordable.
Thank you for that as a citizen. So as I see, as we were talking about, coming up with ways to have a more resilient water system, it kind of keeps coming back to one thing, right? Money. And so I think the real difficulty is going to be where, how can you pay for these projects without passing those costs on to your customers, right? And so, that's the $1 million question. And so, Pam, I think, was talking about working with the different entities relative to grant management. So y'all have a lot of I would say a lot of solutions to a lot of the issues, but, cannot implement without the funding. And so I think probably some of them that I've heard are implementable without a significant amount of funding. Like the, bid to build, design build, and then mapping your water systems and knowing, and I guess that's just, you did that internally in Cape Coral without having to outsource it. You just did it yourselves. And so, and I'm just going to assume, I'm not going to ask, that everybody sort of has their own systems mapped out and knows how they work. And so that's good to know. And so when the flag goes up and stuff's happening, you can know where to go and to shut things off and check things out. So it's apparent to me that you have a lot of solutions, lift station improvement, again, back to money. So I appreciate all your thoughts on that. So do we think that in the Lee County area across all sectors, have we done enough to understand that critical infrastructure needs to be prioritized for improvements that protect access to clean water? Now, you guys will probably say never will be that way. I mean, to me, everybody knows clean water needs to be a priority. And so sometimes you wonder if the people that live here or anywhere in the nation understand, all the ins and outs of it and just how critical it is. I mean, Richard, you were just talking about, salinity in an aquifer, right? And so I'm not sure how many people around here know about that. And so, but it's important to understand that we're trying to introduce new technologies so that we don't run out of water. And so do we think that people in Lee County understand the work that's going on and the work that needs to be done in order to keep the in order to keep the systems not only functioning properly, but moving ahead with growing population, and also ensuring that as we move forward in the future, that we are hardening our water system, against, the next Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane? What do you think? You feeling it from Bonita Springs?
I would say that, on a daily basis, most residents don't realize that. You can't tell them enough until something like this happens. And then they realize that, and I've heard from some others that say, hey, I'd rather have water than my power. Because there's so many things that you just can't do without the water. So, until something happens, I don't think, we can't do enough to try to get that out there to them.
Right. And so does more outreach need to be done in that area?
Yeah, I think that it was a focus after the storm, but I think a lot of people have already forgotten about it.
Happens every time.
We're working to do the septic and the wells, and even in the neighborhoods where they flooded, we're getting a lot of pushback, trying to get them on central water and sewer. Even though they had their septic tanks flood over the top of their wells, so it was just all water together, and the people are still fighting it. So I think it's, some of it's education, but some people are fine with the way they have it. As far as the municipal infrastructure, since, you have everybody here to help lead that along, I think that goes a little bit smoother, but the ones that are on the well and septic, a lot of them are just fine with, what they have.
Right.
And it's not a focus.
Okay, thanks.
I can't really speak for the lay people, but I will tell you who does get it. It's Governor DeSantis and Commissioner Ruane. I mean, they were our advocates and they helped us out a lot. And I've been through, this wasn't my first hurricane. This is like my third major hurricane. And the response we got from the state government and the local government was amazing. So they get it.
That's good. Richard?
Citizens, we need to get a better way to explain some of the challenges that we face going forward, as well as immediately after the storm, because getting the infrastructure for redundancy and resiliency is very expensive. And so if we're going to approach it that way, we were looking for redundancy, and resiliency, we have to put our money where our mouth is, globally.
Totally agree, sir.
So we're limited in the discussion, but most of these folks I was on the phone with for 3 or 4 or 5 days straight, multiple times, and they all truly get the need of water for critical functions, and they've actually worked with me, and we do have, I believe, some really great solutions. So it's money. But I think we could, if we get the money, we can get started on it, and we can take what we believe are one of the critical infrastructure issues off the table if we can put these solutions in quickly. And again, no one thinks about the hardening issues until they lose water, sanitary, then they do. And again, I think going back to the source points, providing the funding that supports all of these folks in their infrastructure is critical to all of us. And also the, again, the sanitary, I can't speak enough of that about having that generation power, because without that, then the community is lost for a long time. And then we can't keep people here to take care of healthcare. So it's,
Right.
I can't, again, begin to tell you how serious and important, and people forget about it, but we don't. So.
Thanks. Pam?
I think it's really building relationships between each other, but also there's plenty of road and bridges projects going on, which includes utilities. There's park projects going on where we can do partnership with parks for source water wells. So for the county, we're a very complicated organization, and it is keeping ourselves in the conversation with other departments and trying to leverage those funding and those relationships. So I think we've got a pretty good communication amongst ourselves, but it's also reaching out to those other entities. So if they're doing projects, then we can partner with them and get the message out of how important utility is, as well as roads, bridges, parks, and other projects.
Right, thanks. Cape Coral?
Definitely the value of water is something that we can all do a better job of getting out there in the public perception. Because a lot of, households, it's almost like air, well, it ought to be free and this and that. But in reality, as we all know, less than 0.5% of all the water on the planet is fresh and can be used for potentially for drinking water sources. So I think, working with our own communications or, PIOs, I know AWWA has a lot of material out there on the internet, because without it, I think sometimes we as humans need to be reminded, like you were saying, well, a lot of people have already forgotten after the hurricane what we went through, that and I felt the same way about power versus water, that I would rather not have power than to have water. And so it really, opens, it's really an eye opener to all of us. And so I think, like I'm saying, I think that we could all, a marketing campaign, getting that word out. I know Lee County did a fabulous job with their marketing campaign on fertilizers, and how that impacts our environment and water quality and surface water, and stormwater. If we had a similar program out there that we all collaborate with as unified utilities, I think it would help, and it would also help to gain approval for some of these large high ticket dollar item projects that we need to do to keep up with growth and to continue serving our existing customers and providing high quality service and, and water. So that's really all I have. Thanks.
We all have effect on our water systems.
Certainly, getting the word out. I know the grants we all hope to get are a one-time fund. And for example, in Cape Coral, we just did a master plan to extend the utilities, and that was about $5 billion. $5 billion. So we have to get the word out that eventually these projects have to be paid through the ratepayer and or assessments, because we won't have these grants. Hopefully, we won't have hurricane grants coming in often. So it's a lot of money.
You're an optimist.
So certainly getting the word out to the individuals. It's always a challenge for us when we extend utilities. And there's a lot of individuals that are very happy on their septic in their well until they lose power during a hurricane.
Right. Hey, does anybody on the branch have any questions for our esteemed panel? Sir?
I have one on the lift stations, like for the hospital, aren't there several lift stations or all have to be working? Like if the one right outside the hospital is working, isn't there others in line to get back to the sewer treatment plant to have to be running too?
Right. I think that's what Richard was trying to hit on is even if their lift station is working, that's a good start. And then if there's other lift stations down the line that are not working, that's where you're doing bypass pumping or you're getting pumper trucks and you're geting generators to them. So you're basically watching the system as a whole and you're trying to get that lift station operating when it needs to make sure that the flow continues. So it is a system-wide issue.
Now, one other comment. Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of aluminum wiring used, including by FPL. FPL, most of their feeders are all aluminum. Aluminum, when it gets salt water on it, goes to crap quick. Copper, in general, can tolerate many, many times better than aluminum. So some of the ideas about wire being buried and all that is not going to quite work out as well as some people might think.
Right. It's a challenge. I think somebody else mentioned that we're looking at like for our control systems to have waterproof containment.
Yeah, and make sure that your wiring inside your system is copper.
That's right. So we're learning. I mean, we're learning like everybody else.
Yes, sir.
Just something that we learned out and working with City of Fort Myers on a new development off of Colonial is the city's working on expanding in source wells. They don't have locations or own land where they can put the wells in. And so because we were working closely on the development of this, they came to us and said, is there a way we can work together and find a location on your property so we can do source wells? So it benefits the whole community. So we're doing that. And the one thing maybe that comes out of that as we go in the future development is make sure that, all the utility members, the building folks are working together because maybe there's opportunities when we develop properties. If there's a need by Lee County Utilities for more source wells and there's a development going on over here, why not work together and help everybody out in the community? So that's what I learned through this project. And I think it's going to help Richard and the city. It helps all of us.
Excellent. And working together, that's how we get things done. So I want to thank our panelists here today. Y'all have done a great job, a lot of knowledge. And I learned a lot about different types of solutions we could use to, enhance the water systems and wastewater systems and to make them more resilient. I also learned that we need to find the money to do it. And so, but anyway, I think that's, rings out loud and clear. There's also some things that you mentioned that can be done, out of our own, just doing it yourselves. And so that's good as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Harrison and going to close us out.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you everyone for coming today. We very much appreciate your time. So here, if some of the branch members will have seen this before, we actually have a little tool. All of this is about getting to solutions. All of this is about thinking big and putting together ideas that we can take forward to put in the plan. As you are reflecting on the conversation we've had today, you can take that QR code right now. You can put your phone up and you put it on your screen. It's a QR code. There's a place where you can actually give us initiative ideas for the plan. So this is just a way to make it simple. As you're thinking about it over the course of the week, anytime you can use that QR code to send us plans directly. You can also do that just through resiliently.com, either way. So I'll give everyone a moment if they want to, if anyone wants to make use of that QR code. Many of you already have it. Okay. And because this is a public meeting, I'll just one more time give everyone a chance to see if there's any more comment, discussion that anyone wants to make. Okay. Great. Then we'll open it up for public comment. If you're a member of the public and would like to speak, you can stand up. I will hand you the microphone.
I thank you all for what you're doing. As a member of the Lee Health Board of Directors, I just want to show my support for the help in the community, keeping our hospitals open, and support exactly what Dave Kistel said. It is absolutely vital to our community and resiliency to make sure we have those water and those sewer resources available to keep our community resilient. Thank you.
Hearing no more public comment, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.